Today, we're going to be implementing Better-Auth, a TypeScript JavaScript library that works really great with Next.js. We can build simple login flows that users understand. We can take advantage of OAuth providers like GitHub and Google to handle our authorization for us. It's easy to integrate with our existing projects with clear and usable APIs. And it can work at any scale, from small apps that we're going to be doing today to large enterprise systems. So let's get to it. We need to install Better-Auth. So first, we're going to go into installation here. We're going to see that there are various different options to use different package managers. I'm going to be using npm for this project again. So we are going to copy this command here. You can select over it and copy it if you prefer to do that. We're going to go into our IDE here where our project is residing. We're going to paste in npm install Better-Auth here. So we appear to have a dependency issue. This is from React 19. And once we've installed Shadcn, this type of error is going to pop up over and over and over again. All that you have to do to fix it, as it says here, we can either fix it, which we personally can't, or we can just retry the command with -- force. I personally have had 0 problems with this. There might be a corner case in which it becomes an issue, but for 99.999% of circumstances, you're not going to see a problem. So for the future, remember to use -- force here if you're using it in conjunction with Shadcn, like we are in this tutorial. Cool. So we have it installed. The next step is we need to set our environment variables. So it says here to create .environment. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to create a new file and do .environment. And then inside of here, we need to first generate a secret key here and then use it in our project. And we can do that by pasting it all into .environment. For a lot of these environment variables, I'd recommend copy and pasting it in, not typing it in or trying to transcribe it. If you make a mistake in transcribing your secret key and you use it within your code base, unlike syntax errors, which might be highlighted, any error between or mismatch between an environment variable and how you call it and use it inside of your project, you're not going to detect it. And then there's going to be a lot of connection issue errors that pop up that you're going to think are related to your code, but nope, it's actually because of your environment variables. So I'm definitely going to recommend that you use some form of copy in order to transcribe your environment variables as opposed to directly typing each one of them in. In the next step, we need to set our base URL. Since we're currently in development and not in production, our URL is going to be localhost 3000. When we actually deploy our production app, this .environment is not going to be carried on. It's not going to be uploaded onto GitHub. And so in the new environment variables that we provide, we need to provide whatever final URL, either the one provided by our hosting service or a custom domain that we have purchased. Okay, so we need to copy this and put it into our environment variables here. Easy. Next step, we need to create a Better-Auth instance inside of our project. And they provide a bunch of different potential locations where we can put this auth.ts, the project root, library folder, or utils. Personally, in my opinion, since this is a external library, I'm going to be putting it into the library folder. I used to put it in my project root, similar to how I used to do it with Next.auth. But for Better-Auth, since it's all in one file, I think it would make more sense and look a little bit easier if I put it in the lib folder. So what we can do is just copy this auth.ts. As you can see here, there's an ellipsis here. There's going to be a lot more code that we're going to be putting in it. But for right now, we just need to get this starter piece of code. So let's copy this. Shifting over to the IDE, we have our library folder here. We're going to create a new file, auth.ts, and we're going to paste in that starter code that they gave us. In order to do authorization, we need to store user data. When someone logs in, we need to store that new account that is being created. And to do that, we need to have a database. We're going to configure the database in a second because I want to wrap up all the things related to auth first. So we're going to skip this step for now. We'll come back to it in a second. What we can do in the meanwhile is to set up our various authorization methods. I personally believe that for beginners, you shouldn't be dealing with email password for yourself. There's a lot of messiness there that new developers shouldn't really handle. I think it would be a lot better to use trusted providers like GitHub and Google for authentication. So let's start with GitHub here, as they have it listed here. You can find all of the different social media sign-on accounts that you can use. We're going to be focusing on GitHub and Google because those are generally, for developers and for regular people, the most popular options. With GitHub, we have to get GitHub credentials, and that requires you to have a GitHub account. So let's jump over into the browser and log into GitHub real quick. Okay, we're in GitHub here. We're going to open up the panel here to go to our settings. Then we're going to scroll all the way down before we get to developer settings. Make sure you're not creating a GitHub app, you're creating an OAuth app. And we're going to click here to create our new one. Generally in GitHub, I'll create 2 different versions of the OAuth app for my websites. One of them is for development and one of them is for test. And the reason for that is this authorization callback URL. If we go back to the Better-Auth documentation, it says here that we need to set our redirect URL to localhost 3000 API auth callback GitHub. So basically, when it asks GitHub for a user's information, because GitHub is going to be processing for you the login, it needs a place to redirect you back, basically this callback here. And so on development, we're going to be running localhost 3000, like the base URL that we set earlier. But here, we only have room for one callback URL. And so if we have one for our development, well, we obviously can't point it back to localhost 3000. That's only for development. We need whatever our development production domain is. And so that's what the second OAuth app is for. It's for our production domain that we're going to be providing. So usually I'll just create, right, if the name of the project, for example, was tutorial, right, then I would create tutorial-test for the localhost one, the one that we're going to be using during development, and then create another one for the production app. So to fill out the rest of it, the homepage URL, http://localhost 3000. And then we can just go back here, copy this bit here. This is our callback URL, as they call it here. They call it the redirect URL. Both are equivalent, right? Once we have all of this filled out, we can register the application. Now be very careful with the next steps, because when you generate this client secret and for some reason you navigate from this page, you get disconnected from the internet, you're not going to be able to see this. You're going to need to generate a new client secret. It's a whole hassle to do so. So get it right on the first run. So if we go back to the Better-Auth documentation, it'll show us how we can configure the provider. So what we're going to do is just copy this portion here into our code base, right? So where we have this commented out ellipses, we're just going to paste in social providers, right? First, we're going to have GitHub here, and for some reason there's some extra tabs. So just pretty that up a little bit. You don't actually have to do that, but I'll do it just to make it look better. We need our client GitHub client ID and GitHub client secret. So first, we'll deal with the client ID because it's less tricky. Make sure that these are consistent between what we have in our environment variables here and what we have in auth. So what we're going to do is just copy this, paste it here, then go into GitHub, grab our client ID here, hit equals, paste that in there. Then the next step, GitHub client secret, and save that. Go back into our GitHub dashboard here for our OAuth app. We're going to generate a new client secret. And then, see this, make sure to copy your new client secret now. You won't be able to see it again. You'd have to delete it and then create another one. So, copy, all right, and go back into our .environment, paste it in there. Make sure that you're pasting everything. Don't transcribe anything. You don't want any inadvertent mistakes to derail you. And these environment variable errors are really hard to suss out. And so, yeah, make sure that you're just copy pasting everything. Make life easier for you. The last step just explains to you how you're going to be signing in with GitHub. So we'll save that for when we revisit our login page. Now we're going to be going on to implementing Google credentials. Now, Google's developer experience is challenging to say the least, and we're going to be using Google Cloud Console. You're going to have to follow me. I'll try to go as slow as I can through all the different steps. There's a lot of them, and it's not the most clear and straightforward way like GitHub, but since Google has so many users, and most likely most people have some form of Gmail account, it's pretty important that we do it. So let's jump right into it. Okay, so here's a quick search for Google Cloud Console here. It's the second result here. You're looking for cloud.google.com, Cloud Console here. So we're just going to click on this. This will take you directly to it, but in case you wanted to do a little bit of read up about Google Cloud and all that stuff, we're really only going to be using auth in this tutorial, so we can just start for free here. It'll take you to your login. You're going to need to have some form of Gmail account, whether it's G Suite or a regular Gmail account. So feel free to create one and then sign in. Okay, so when you come onto the Google Cloud screen for the first time, it's going to say all of the Google Cloud products. Again, you don't need that. We only need auth. So unlike GitHub, Google requires that you put in a credit card before you access Google Cloud, and we need Google Cloud in order to do auth. So if you are a bit concerned and don't want to put in a credit card information in, or you don't have one, then feel free to skip this. For people who want to continue, just note you won't be charged unless you activate your full pay-as-you-go account or choose to prepay. We're not going to be doing any of that stuff, so unless they change something in the future, you will not be charged. So you put in your payments information, and I'll skip to the step after it for obvious reasons, not to share out my personal payment information. Okay, so once you're finished with all the random billing related stuff, you'll be approached with your dashboard. It's really intense. There's a lot of junk on it, if I'm being completely honest, and Google's not the best at designing stuff, but we can just click out of all of this stuff. We're going to go over to the navigation menu here, and what we are specifically looking for is in APIs and services, we're looking for the OAuth consent screen here. So we're going to click that first. Is in API and services, we're looking for OAuth consent screen here. Click on that. It'll be taking you to here. And then we need to configure our Google Auth platform. So we're going to hit get started here. We need to provide a app name, right? So for our app, we're just going to call it tutorial. Provide the email that you use to log in as the user support email. Next, we're going to select external here. You're going to have to push it to live, but honestly, I haven't faced any issues with production apps with actually having to move it out of test. I wonder if it's a certain amount of users that you have to break through, but that's a problem that I'm sure you can have one of your employees take care of if you ever become big enough. So for now, just using external is fine. Then for contact information, you can provide the same one as you used to log in. So there's that one. And then we agree to their terms and services. You can check it out there. Continue for some reason. And hit create. Great. And then we need to create a OAuth client here. So we have an application type, web application in our case. Then the name of the app. So we've already provided a name before, tutorial. Obviously name it whatever you want for your own project. This is just an internal product, so product name. And so for us, we can just call it tutorial, test 1, whatever we want to name it. And then for authorized JavaScript origins and redirect URIs, just provide the same things as we put in GitHub. So for the URI, https://localhost 3000. And the thing I do like about Google, and probably the only redeeming factor, is that I don't have to create a bunch of different OAuth client IDs for a bunch for development or production. I can keep it all the same by just adding additional URIs. So makes it a lot easier. Then next here, we're going to go really quickly back to Better-Auth here, and we are going to copy the corresponding redirect URL for Google here. We're going to add it in as the authorized redirect URI here, and then we're going to hit create. And then here is our client ID, so we need to click on that to copy it, go back into our code base. Actually, before we do that, real quick, let's grab this chunk here from the Better-Auth documentation, right? So we just move down a little bit to step 2 here, grab this piece, go into auth.ts, and put it underneath GitHub here. Oh my gosh, the styling from this copy is terrible. So cool. Then we just copy in Google Client ID, enter, and then we can actually do the same really quick for Google Client Secret. Enter. Go back to our Google screen here. Copy this. Again, copy, don't rewrite it. You're definitely going to make a mistake and then regret it later. And then now we need to generate our secret. Okay. For whatever reason, it doesn't automatically show you the secret. You have to go into edit OAuth client or just click on it, right? You'll be taken to this screen. Then you'll just have your secret here. And unlike GitHub, you won't worry, it's always going to be there. So feel free to use it as you see fit. So great. Now we have both GitHub and Google configured. Now we need to make sure that our project works with Next.js. So let's go back over to the documentation here. Let's scroll down to integrations and then choose Next.js. So one of the first things here that we have to do is to create an API route to use it with Next.js. So we're going to copy this piece of code and just note this directory path that we have to add in. So where API goes is inside of our app folder here. So source app, we're going to add a new folder, API, and then we're going to create a nested folder inside of there with auth, another folder with a square bracket to catch all here, and then a new file, route.ts, which we can paste in the information that we provided. Here they used @lib/auth, another reason to put your auth in libs. Okay, now we can move on to creating a client. We need to create a client instance. That way we can use the sign in and sign out methods that are available to us from Better-Auth. All right, back over to the documentation. After we've created our API route, we need to create a client instance. Here, it recommends creating a auth client.ts file, put it inside of our library directory here. So all we need to do is copy the code here, go back to our code base, inside of our lib folder here, add in a new file, auth, dash client.ts, paste that code in there, and we're ready to move on to the next step. We don't need any client configurations here. You're welcome to look at the documentation, and if you'd like to provide any, you're certainly welcome to. I believe that they put an extra space there. Strange. So yeah, let's move on to the next step. Back into the documentation, we're hitting a very important piece here, React server components and server actions. We don't use any server actions in this tutorial, or really any of my tutorials, to be completely honest. You're certainly welcome to use server actions if you'd like, and if you think it improves your code. But for me, I'm going to specifically be using React server components. So we can skip this portion here, move on down to this example here. In this example, they provide an example server component. Here we can see that this function is an asynchronous function. Here it's because getSession returns a promise, so we need to invoke await here to wait for the promise to resolve. We're making an API call over to our database and checking it to see if the user is currently authorized or not, if they're logged in as well. We have headers here, which is to resolve the response headers that we get back. And we get the user session data. In this conditional here, we are making an evaluation. If sessions exists, we fall through with this not here. If there's not of session of undefined, then we're not authenticated. Here, they're choosing to conditionally render things based off of if a person is authenticated. If they are, then we're able to get the user's name. Sometimes, and most often in my tutorial, you'll want to redirect the user, often to the login page if they're not authenticated and they're trying to access a page that requires authentication. So we'll often redirect them from that page. You could also display an error state by saying you're not authenticated, you need to log in, here's a login button to then go over to login. So it's certainly up to you and how you want to design your website to handle these unauthorized, authorized potential redirects, such as if you're on the landing page. The converse would be, if you're on a landing page, it's typically a public website, but if a user is already logged in, we might want to punt them over to the internal homepage for an authorized user. Then we can do a redirect to any form of authorized page. So we're not going to have to really worry about the rest of this, server action, cookies, any middleware. Us using auth with Google and GitHub, they take care of most of that for us. So we're only going to need to be worrying about implementing this in our code. But before we actually get to implementing authorization, remember we skipped the database earlier. So we're going to do a little bit of cleanup of some of our front end so that we can do a little demonstration of login and ensuring that we can properly query our database. So let's jump back into the code and clean up some things. Going into our code here, we're going to close all the stuff that we don't need for now. So inside of our home page here, this looks like a good start for a login page. So we're going to make a quick transfer. We're going to create a route to login here. We're going to move this page.tsx into the newly created route of login here. So we're going to move it. We need to rename this because this is no longer the home page. This is now the login page. And I don't typically use function components, so we're going to switch this to an error function. Might as well do it now while we're doing a little bit of spring cleaning. We are going to change this from, we're not going to use email and password per my recommendations earlier. We're going to use GitHub and Google. So here we're going to say using your preferred Auth Provider. Or actually, instead of saying Auth Provider, we'll just say using your preferred login method, GitHub or Google. We can remove all this bit about the email and password, and we can get rid of the card footer. Consequently, we're going to get rid of some of the imports here. Great. Then we need a landing page here. A div. This is the landing page. So remember, in the URL, this would be at slash, right? The login page would be at slash login. And oh, that reminds me, I need to export default this as well. Export default login page. Let's add in export default landing page here before we forget. Then we need to add in a home page to finish out this login demo that we're going to do to test everything out. So we're going to create a home route here. Then we're going to create page.tsx and then do const home page here. And we're going to need this one. Return a div. Inside of it, this is the home page. And just to remember, it will be at slash home in the URL for this page. All right, let's make sure that we export default this one as well. Export default home page. Now that we've finished the basic structure of our front end, we need to set up our back end. In order for our app to properly authenticate users, we need to store the user's credentials into a database. Now, I don't know about you, but I hate writing raw SQL. I think that it's infinitely better to write our schemas and our queries in TypeScript to take advantage of type safety and easier coding. So let's get started. We're here now in the Drizzle ORM documentation. We can hit Get Started here. We're using Neon here, and we have a couple of commands to use in order to install Neon, as well as Drizzle ORM. So we have to still deal with the React 19 issues. So we're going to have to use -- force along with any console installations. So we're going to select over it and hit Control-C to copy it. Go into our terminal here, paste it in there, and then write in -- force. So make sure that we install Drizzle ORM, Neon, and .environment, which we'll be using later on. While that's installing, I'm just going to go back to our documentation here, copy over this installation command, copy it. Now that this one's done, I'm going to paste this one in, -- force again, hit enter, and install that one. Great. Going back to the documentation, we've already taken care of step 2. Inside of our .environment folder, we already have our database URL, so step 2 is done. Moving on to step 3 here, they're asking us to create an index.ts file in the source/db directory, and then we have to initialize our connection to our database. Switching over to our IDE again, let's clean things up, close everything down so we can focus specifically on our database. Let's close our app folder. And at the source level here, we're going to right-click New Folder here and add one, DB, as they instruct. Inside of this database folder, we're going to add a new file, index.ts, and then we're going to paste in the code that they provide. Make sure that you are providing this top one, not this bottom one. Now, it's going to say argument of type string or undefined is not assignable to type string and a bunch of other things. So the reason for that is that there's no assurances that this environment variable exists inside of our environment folder here. Technically, the IntelliSense doesn't know. And so what we can do is just assure it by making sure ourselves that we put it in there. We can just provide this explicit operator here that basically says, yes, this either exists, or we can cast it as string. Technically a little bit dangerous, but as long as we make sure that we have our database URL, this will be fine. And then lastly, I'm going to amend their code a little bit by adding an export so that we can actually utilize the database in other files. Make sure that you've pasted in this code, not this one. Cool. Going back over to the documentation, moving on from step 3 to step 4, we need to create a schema for our project. Now, this first part of the schema needs to be what we're providing in Better-Auth. Now, they do have a bit here about how to work with Drizzle, which requires using their CLI tool. In my experience, it produces not the best formatted code, so I think you're better off just recreating it manually. Also, it'll give you a better understanding of all the pieces that are available to you in this authorization tool. So we're going to go back to installation here. We're going to go to create database tables, and then scroll on down until you see this little note here. We want to create this schema manually. So we're going to hit this database section. And now we have each of the individual pieces that we're going to have to add. So this will give us a great opportunity as well to introduce some of the key Drizzle concepts while also looking at the Better-Auth concepts. So let's start here with what a user is with Better-Auth. So they have an access to a unique ID, which means that we can search for a particular user by their ID. We have a user's chosen display name. That's the one that they provide to GitHub or Google. The email, same thing, just for their email. If their email has been verified or not, that'll be a Boolean, true or false. Some form of image. Here it's optional, marked optional, because there could be an image, could not. For example, if you never provided an image to GitHub, then you would just have the basic profile picture. Same goes for Gmail. Created at, and then updated at. You can read here the timestamp of when the user account was created for created at, updated at, timestamp of the last update to the user's information, just in case you need it. So now we're going to add this into our project schema. So to do that, we're going to jump back into our code here. We're going to close this stuff out. We're going to add in our DB folder here a new file, schema.ts. So we're going to provide export const user, and it's going to be our first Postgres table. So we're going to use PG table here, grab it from Drizzle ORM /PG core. We need to provide a name for this table, so we're just going to name it user. And then inside of this, we're going to provide the ID, which will be of type text. Now, there's a lot of different sources for a text. We are looking for specifically the same one where we pulled this PG table, Drizzle ORM /PG core. So an easier way than just adding one via the tab here would just be adding it up here. So that's what I'm going to do from now on. We're going to need to provide the label ID to it, and this is going to be the primary key that we use to search users. We're going to need the name here of type text name, and then we're going to provide not null, so it's not optional. When we get to images, we're going to omit not null. Next, we're going to provide our email, text of email, not null, just copying through all of these. We need to make sure that this email is unique. So unlike name, which some people might have the same display name, we want to make sure that the email is unique. Here, the ID, we've already declared it a primary key, and so each ID should be unique anyways. We're going to have email verified, which will be of type Boolean. And then, so we're going to need to add Boolean up top here. Boolean, true or false. Email underscore verified, not null. Image, text, image created at, which will be of type timestamp. So that's a new thing. We're going to have to add that up here. Timestamp, which will be basically a date object. Created at not null. And finally updated at, which will be a timestamp updated underscore at not null. Great. So we have our user. After users, we are concerned with the current session. So we have an ID for the session. We have a user ID. So this is a key that refers to this user. So it creates a relation between this sessions table with a particular user. There is a session token when the session expires, the IP address of the device, the user agent information of the device, if available, and then, again, created at and updated at. So now we're going to add that to our schema. So let's switch over to our code here. And we're going to create another table. I'm going to go a little bit faster now since we've already created one table. PG table, name it session, ID, text, ID, primary key, user ID, text, user ID. Whoops, not null. And this is going to be a reference. We're going to provide a reference here to the user table and specifically to the ID. And we're going to have an onDelete be cascading. So basically, if a user in this table has a relation to a session, so that means that session belongs to one of the users. If that user gets deleted from our database, then it's going to cascade and delete the sessions as well. Next, token, text, token, not null, and this is going to be unique here. We're going to have expires at timestamp, expires at not null, IP addresses, which will be of type text, IP addresses, and this is optional, so no, not null. User agent, text user underscore agent here, and then created at and updated at, we'll just copy paste it from here. Great. So up to this point, this is what our schema.ts should look like. Let's move on to the next part. Okay, so I believe that I transcribed all of the individual pieces. They were all, for the most part, pretty easy to translate over to Drizzle. And we've reused a lot of these already, so sorry for moving that there. So yeah, feel free to take some time to copy it over. Make sure that you have everything in there before we move on to the next step. Once you're finished transcribing that, we can go back to our documentation. We're basically done with Better-Auth. We can go back to Drizzle ORM, move on from step 4 here on to step 5. We need to set up a Drizzle config file here, and Drizzle config here, as it states, a config file that is used by DrizzleKit, the CLI tool that they use, that they've created at Drizzle, that contains all the information about your database, connection, migration folder, schemas, and DrizzleKit allows for you to perform changes to the database, as seen here, push, and the more safer version, generate and migrate. So let's set up this Drizzle config file. Let's copy it and jump over to code. So it's asking us to create the drizzle config.ts file in the root of our project. So what is the root of our project? If we close this out, close everything, the root is all of these files here. So just outside and all the way at the bottom here, we're going to do drizzle.config.ts, and then we'll paste in this code here. Make sure that we have everything that we need. .environment config, define config. Make sure that the schema that you put is in the right location. So it's looking for source, DB, and then the schema.ts file. We're using PostgresQL, and then process.environment database _URL. So make sure that you spelled it correctly in your .environment folder file, so that we don't have any sort of connection errors. Great. So now we can move on, and looking at step 6 here, let's try to generate this and then apply the migrations. The safer version, you technically do push, but push is not safe. It's used for quickly testing new schema designs, but in actual production, it's safer to use generate and migrate. It checks for errors, and you'll need to use fine-grained SQL controls. I suppose in an MVP, it's totally fine to push, but if you're working with a teammate might not be happy if you push and clobber over their changes. Generate and migrate, you might be able to roll back a particular change. Okay, we can go into our terminal, npx drizzle kit generate. This is always a last opportunity for us to take a look at our schema, make sure that we don't have any overlapping ones, make sure that everything looks correctly, just checking it against the table real quick and allowing for everyone to take one last look at this schema that we've created. Scrolling through slowly, feel free to pause to take a look at it. Everything looks about right to me, no duplicate ones. Everything has a primary key. Cool. There's a triple check there. You can now hit npx drizzle generate. You can see we have a table here, 13 columns, 8 columns, 7 columns, and 6 columns. Great, 4 tables. It will generate from our schema.ts here a resulting drizzle or a resulting SQL file. So you can look through here, and if you're curious, you can see how it translates to SQL. Very often, you might want to check it to make sure that all of the SQL is correct, but for me personally, until you get to some of the advanced features of Drizzle, generally its tool is able to generate properly. So if you're just sticking to the basic Boolean, timestamp, text, you should be totally fine. So next, after we're done generating, we can do npx drizzle kit migrate. Everything looks to be working fine. We can switch over to our Neon dashboard here, go into our tables here, and we're able to see that our 4 tables have been created, along with all of the columns that we have declared in our schema file. So great, we now have our database connected. We have all the tables that we require for Better-Auth, and we know now how to use Drizzle ORM, and if we need to add more things to our schema, we totally can. So now let's go back to our demo, test it out, see if we can adequately log in. Let's give a brief basic usage overview of Better-Auth. So here they're going to use GitHub as an example, but remember that we added both GitHub and Google. So when we conduct a sign-in here, we're going to be using our auth client that we created in @lib auth client. The way that we can get it follows this particular schema here. So the ID of the provider, it's a plain text string that you provide. So we're going to be using GitHub and Google. So we're going to provide GitHub and Google for the appropriate sign-in function call. Then we're going to need a URL to redirect after the user authenticates with the provider. So we're going to go over to home afterwards. So by default, it goes to /, but remember for us in our landing page, it's going to be the public side. So we're going to be going to /home. Here they do /dashboard. A URL to redirect if an error occurs during the sign-in process. So if you'd like to create an error state and put it under your own route, you're welcome to do so. A URL to redirect if the user is newly registered. This can take you over to a onboarding page, so that's really useful there. And then we can also disable the automatic redirect to the provider. So that's by default false, but if you need to set up an automatic redirect, then you can leave that to true. In this tutorial, we're not going to touch this one. We're mostly going to be concerned with these two, the provider and then the callback function. We're not going to provide an error state because it does have one by default, but if you wanted to provide a custom one, you're certainly welcome to do so. Then on the sign out side here, we also have another asynchronous function here, awaiting a sign out. We have our fetch options. On success, when we sign out, we need to go somewhere. We can either redirect to the login page, which in my personal opinion, it's kind of weird because if someone just signed out, would they want to sign in again? Potentially, maybe to a different account. For me personally, I push people to the landing page to just demonstrate to them that they're fully logged out, but I also think that in some cases, login, pushing someone to the login, also totally valid. Now, you'll see here, right, that we're using router here, and in this one, it's already a part of the function to redirect, but in both of these cases, invoking this function, you're generally going to do that on the click of a button. And so on clicks in React generally are done in client components. So we're going to need to separate out a bit of our code into client components when it comes to signing in and signing out. So we'll do that in a little bit. But yep, once we do that, we're going to need to separate these out into client components. On the pages themselves, we are going to be grabbing the session data. Now we can do it on the client side, but we're going to need to do some server side things on our pages. So we're going to be worrying about using get session here. So you can see here that they're creating a way to get your sessions awaiting the get sessions function invocation, passing in the headers. We can create a little wrapper around this to have a common function, so we don't have to write this in every single one of our files. So let's jump into the code and do that real quick. All right, so for our demo, let's go back and take a look at the specific pages here. And something that we're going to need to add is a way to actually get to our login page from our landing page, and then maybe a button for us to sign out of. So, and also hook up authorization as well. Okay, so here in the landing page, we're going to need to provide a link from next/link here. Provide an href, which will be going over to login. And then inside of here, we'll just add in a button from Shadcn components and put inside of our button log in. So let's just take a look at that real quick. Okay, we have a login button, but let's make this look a little bit better. Flex items, center, min, height, screen. Let's just check on the login. Anything else that we need? Justify center with the full. Okay, I'll just copy that so that we have a full screen here. And let's just save that. Make sure, okay, everything is there. We just need to do flex column so that things are right on top of each other. That looks great. Let's make sure that we can hit the login button here. Okay, great. That takes us over to our login screen. And then obviously when we log in, we'll be taken to home. And then I will actually copy paste this bit. Well, this bit here first into our home, just for, again, this is for demo purposes. We're going to need to create a specific component. And so in our components here, we're going to create a new folder here for auth to create a sign out button. Sign out button.tsx. The reason that we need to create a separate one is that it's going to be a client component. Okay, so back into our code here, we're going to go to library, we're going to go to our auth.ts file here. We're going to need to add in a couple of things. From the documentation inside of the Drizzle information, we're going to need to provide our database. So we're just going to copy this bit here, go into our Better-Auth instance here, paste it in there. We need to provide both of these. We can just copy the imports from here. So this one's correct, but the DB is from a different location. Let's import. For some reason, it's not auto importing DB from @/DB. There we go. We are not using SQLite. We're using Postgres. So make sure that you make that change. Then we're going to need to provide a page to let Better-Auth know where our login is going to be. So it's going to be on the login route. So make sure that you write it correctly. Login here. And then lastly, we're going to do export const get session. So we're going to create a helpful wrapper function, async auth API get session headers await headers. We're going to grab that from next/headers, bring that up here, and that is a function. Cool. So now inside of our pages, we can do get sessions and determine whether or not the user is authorized or not. Okay, now let's update the UI so that we can incorporate some of the authorization specific code so that we can perform the demo. After we finished creating our schema, we can then add it in to the Drizzle instance that we've created inside of index.ts. So we're going to just provide import star as schema from @/db/ or actually we can just do ./schema since we're not going to be moving these away from each other. So now we can just provide in schema to here. And we need to wrap schema within an object. Once we save that, we should be all set. Let's add in export const sign out button here. Then upon a successful sign out, we're going to need to navigate the user. And in our case, we're going to navigate them to the login screen. So we're going to do const router is equal to use router. So we're going to call the use router hook. This first one, next/router, is for page routers. We're using app router, so we're not going to use this one. We're going to use the one from next/navigation. You can see here, this one's for app router. And for this specific example, to use inside of a client component, we've used the use client directive here to declare that sign out button is a client component. So we need to use the second one. Make sure you don't make that mistake. So there, we've called the hook there to get our router instance. Then next, we need to get a neat sign out method, which will be an asynchronous arrow function here, awaiting the result of auth client. Grab that from @/lib auth client. Let's just move these into ABC order. Dot sign out there. Sign out takes in an object with our fetch options, which also is another object here on success. So when we're successful in our sign out, we're going to do router.push over to login. Great. Whoops. Okay, comma, semicolon. And then I'm going to provide the rest of the contents of our sign out button here. Make sure that you're grabbing it from @/components UI button. Great. And then for our on click, and click here, we're going to have sign out, and then variant, just to make it look different than the earlier login button. We're going to use variant of outline. Great, and provide sign out. Great. So make sure that we have everything in here that we need for a sign out button. Then in our home page, we're adding a sign out button. Okay, great. Next, we're going to implement some authorization to our pages here. So starting with the landing page, let me just reorder this. This is going to be a public page, and so if the user is logged in already, then they're going to be kicked over to the home page. If they're unauthorized, then they can just stay on the landing page. For the login page, it's a public page, obviously, for login. But if you're already logged in, then it's going to kick you to home. And then home is going to be the private page. If you navigate to home and you're not authorized, it's going to kick you over to login. And obviously, if you are authorized, it should display all this information, allow for you to sign out, which will ultimately kick you to the login page. So let's implement that. Okay, starting with the landing page here. So what we're going to do is first make this asynchronous. If you remember, our getSession function was asynchronous. So we need to grab the promise from it and evaluate it so we can get a valid sessions object. Look if here, if you did not do await, you'd be getting a promise, which you can't use. So here, by evaluating it, we can do the same check as was described in the documentation. If session does exist, we're going to call the redirect function here, grab it from next/navigation. I don't know what this one is. Use this one. This one's the navigation one. Can be used in server components, which this one is, so that we can make this one asynchronous. Cool. So we're going to redirect and go over to home. So if the user is authorized, then there will be a session instance. And in this session instance, if it exists, then we're going to redirect to home. Otherwise, we're just going to flow through to the landing page. Great. On the login, well, we've used the use client directive here. And so we're going to need to extract some of these pieces out of here, as well as implementing sign-in. So let me skip that for now. Let's go over to home. So home is going to be the opposite of what we did on the landing page. So we're going to grab session here, get, await, get session. We have an error because I did not make this asynchronous. Let's order this in ABC order. And then if not session, so if a session does not exist for the user, we're going to redirect them to the login screen. Let's bring that to the top just to get everything in ABC order. Great. Okay, now on to the login. We're going to have to modify our landing page here to be a server component. And so we're going to have to do a little bit of refactoring to change this from a client component. So the first thing that we can do is get rid of this use client declaration there. We're going to have to move this portion into its own component. So we're going to go into auth here, and we're going to create a new file, login buttons.tsx. This is going to be a client component. Use client at the top. Export const login buttons, and we're going to return this bit here. Let's make this look better. Great. And we're going to need some imports. So let me go back here, retrieve these imports from the login page. So I'm just cutting and pasting these in here, and I cut in the wrong place. There we go. Great. So everything looks right. And so now we can just call login buttons. There we go. Was waiting for that tab option. Cool. So there we go. If we go over to the code, we refresh. Yep, everything looks the same on the login. Wonderful. So let's add in the same thing that we had within our landing page. So this is a public page, but if the user is already logged in, then we'd redirect them to home. They don't need to do the login again. If they wanted to log in with a different account, for example, then they'd have to sign out, get back to the login, and then log in with a different account. Great. So now going back over to the login page, we need to create two sign-ins. So sign in with GitHub and a const sign in with Google. We're going to start back up with GitHub here, and we're going to do async arrow function await auth client. So import that from /lib auth client dot sign in, and we're using social sign in here. And we're going to provide a callback URL, which will be home, and a provider, which will be GitHub, all lowercase. Great. And we're going to do basically a similar thing for Google. Let me just copy that, paste it over for Google, but instead of GitHub here, I'm going to use Google instead. Then let me just make this a little bit neater. And just do click, provide sign in with GitHub here. And then we can just copy this here, put this here, and instead of sign in with GitHub, we're using sign in with Google instead. Did I misspell something? Oh, uppercase I. There. Let's look through and make sure that everything is in there. Make sure that you're grabbing auth client from /lib auth client, the Shadcn button, sign in with GitHub. We are providing a callback URL on a successful GitHub login. We're going to home and using the provider GitHub there, callback URL home, provider is Google for Google. In the GitHub button, we're signing in with GitHub, and with the Google button, we're signing in with Google. Great. Everything looks in order. We have our login button inside of the login page. All right. Let's navigate over to our thing here. Okay, so let's try out using GitHub first. So it'll take us to this GitHub login screen. So I'm going to log in real quick. Okay, and once we hit authorized after we logged in here, we're going to be redirected to our home page here. When we hit sign out, we get back over to the login. So now let's try Google. Okay, and when I click on Google here, I'll be prompted to sign in. So I'm going to sign in with my test account here. And once I sign in, we're going to be taken to the home screen again. Wonderful. So we can sign out, we can try it all again, GitHub, successful login, sign out, Google, successful login. Wonderful. So obviously, if we try to go to the landing page here, we're going to be redirected back to home. If we sign out, we'll go back to login. If I try to go to home, I'm going to be sent back to login. So I don't know if you saw that on the top. We can try it again, just so you can see, pay attention. See, when I hit home here, I hit enter, redirects me back over to login. If I log in real quick, I'm taken to home. If I try to go to localhost 3000, just at the base level here, I hit enter, I get sent over to home. Wonderful. So we're verified that our authentication works. One thing that we can also look at is how it looks like underneath the hood. So let's take a look here. Let me just refresh the database here. Make sure that we have everything. We have the two Google and GitHub accounts here. And you might notice something here. We only have one user. So because we said that the email is unique, even though this person has used two different accounts, this person being me, they have the same email. So thus only one user is created. But we've basically linked this one user to two separate accounts, one using GitHub and one using Google. So great. Hopefully you've been able to understand how authorization works. Now we're going to continue working with our database here. How can we get some more data stored onto a server and be able to retrieve it? It's the main basis for any application. So let's dig deeper into some services that are going to help us